I'm Frank. All right, where's the screen? I'll share. Here we go. All right, we're going to go over the contract. Basically, just the basics. I'll try to give you insights as I have them as we go through it. There are only a few of us on this call here, so if you want to stop me anywhere and have questions, please do. If I didn't cover anything well, I'll skip over too quickly or whatever. But we'll go ahead and get started. Starts out pretty basically. The buyer's names. You put one buyer's name here and another buyer's name here. Sometimes you'll have just one buyer, that's fine. Sometimes you'll have 3 or 4. Best thing to do is just try to cram them in as best you can. If you can't fit all the buyers in, you can use page 8 to list them on there. I'll show you that when we get there. So generally we want to use people's full names or their legal names. Sometimes they use an initial, sometimes they don't. You can also use the name of an LLC. However, if you do use the name of an LLC or corporation, you still need an actual human to sign it. So it can't be signed like Lone Tree LLC. That cannot be a signature. It has to be Joe Smith for Lone Tree LLC. That's a little more detail than you guys probably need right now, but just know that you can do that in a buyer's name. Seller's name could be the same thing. It could be an LLC, could be a corporation, or just people's names. Fit them as best you can. Premises address, basically the address of the property. With the assessor's number, you can often get that from MLS. I usually recommend getting that from the tax records. People sometimes mistype stuff in MLS, and you want to make sure you get the right assessor's number. City and county, that's pretty self-explanatory as a zip code. The legal description, you get that from the tax records as well. Interestingly enough, the short version of the legal description is usually the long version. I have never figured out why, but I always go for the longest one you have because it's just the most descriptive. And you can find that in Monsoon tax records as well, that and the assessor's number. Full purchase price. This is the price of the offer that your client wants to make on the house. The earnest money they want to put down. Generally here, we would put down down payment amount. So if they want to put 20% down, you take the full purchase price and times that by 20%. Pretty easy. This is the line we'd put like conventional loan. I can't type today. Or you could put VA loan. Whatever type of loan it is. So here's a quick thing that a lot of people do is they think this is like a math equation here, and it's technically not. The down payment should represent the percentage that the loan requires. So these numbers don't all have to add up. The earnest money, for instance, goes towards the down payment. So it doesn't have to be a separate amount. So whatever the purchase price is, if it's a 20% down, put the 20% down here. So if it's $100,000 loan and it's 20% down, so it'll be $20,000. Your conventional loan is going to be $80,000. So if your earnest money is say $2,000, it's just $2,000. It doesn't have to factor into these other amounts. So earnest money would probably go towards a down payment. So your client would rather, they'll instead bring $18,000 to closing instead of $20,000. But these numbers don't all have to add up. It's not a math equation. They're just factual representations of what they are. So 100,000 is the actual full purchase price. 2,000 is earnest money. 20,000 is down payment. 80 is the conventional loan. So these two numbers, the down payment plus the conventional, should equal the purchase price. Does that all make sense? I know that's a little confusing, but I'll take that as a yes. I didn't hear anything. Earnest money, it comes in the form of a personal check, wire transfer. It can be ACH'd. I think I've seen cash once. I don't think title companies like that very much. But if it is an other situation, just choose other. Just make sure you're choosing one of these boxes and then filling in whatever's necessary. Escrow company, it's always the escrow company. It's never the broker's trust account. We don't hold earnest money deposits at the brokerage. Very few brokerages actually do. We all defer that to a title company. It's just more arm's length and better for us liability wise. Close of escrow date. I always recommend you talk to your lender regarding this if there's a lender involved to make sure they can get it done. So Some lenders can do it, 2-3 weeks, depending how far along they are with the information they have for the buyer. Generally, I'd say the norm is probably a month, 30 days. So in a month like this month, you have, actually Christmas is on a Sunday. So does that make New Year's on a Sunday too? So may not be losing days. A typical December though, you could lose up to 2 days. Plus people go on vacations this time of year and other things. So 30 days in December is not a good method to go by. I would definitely check with the lender before you fill in the close of escrow date, and obviously confirm with your client too. My rule of thumb is I never close on a Monday or a Friday. Mondays are just hectic, and Fridays, if it doesn't close, then your client's driving around a U-Haul for the weekend until it closes on Monday. So if it doesn't close Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, there's still a chance it could close on a Friday. So that way they still get that weekend. That's just my own personal preference. As far as possession, it's almost always at close of escrow. There could be another scenario where they do a lease back or something else, and you can type that in here. We'll get into that in another discussion. As far as addenda incorporated, there's the additional clause addendum, there's a buyer contingency addendum, domestic water well addendum, HOA addendum, loan assumption addendum, on-site wastewater treatment facility addendum, seller financing addendum, short sale addendum, solar addendum. And you'll notice that I was very repetitive there. They're all addenda. And this is the section for choosing addenda. There are a couple others that aren't listed here that you could add if you want. But what does not go here is disclosures. So a lot of people like to add the market conditions advisory in here. That's an advisory, it's not an addenda, so or not an addendum, so it doesn't go here. Anything that's an advisory is just that, an advisory. It's not contractual. It's just a notification or a disclosure to a client about something we're doing, like the business affiliation disclosure that we work with Magnus Title and other companies. That's a disclosure. It's not contractual because we don't have both parties sign it and they're not agreeing to it. So those kinds of things don't belong here. People put them in, and I'm not going to reject a contract if it has it in here. It's just not where it goes though. It doesn't need to actually go in there at all. This is strictly for addenda, whatever ones you think are adding. The only exception to that is the federal document, which is the lead-based paint disclosure. And because that's a federally required document, it is added in here. It's not technically an addendum, but all parties do sign it. And it's, because it's a federal government required document, they felt it important enough to put here. That's the only exception in this case. This is a list of all the things that transfer with the property typically. So if your client doesn't want these things or wants other things in the property, you would add them below. Like the refrigerator doesn't always convey. So if you do want it to convey, you want to check the box. Generally, what a lot of people do will say, stainless, Samsung, as seen, as shown, something like that effect. So they put a description in here because what happens in the past is they'll see a stainless Samsung, which is like a $2,000 refrigerator, and when they close on the house, they end up getting a over and under white used I don't know, GE or whatever. So you don't want the sellers to switch it out. So it's best to just identify what it is. Same with the washer and dryer. If there's a specific one they're coming and conveying with the house, just identify them. Some people go as far as getting serial numbers and things. Typically you have to pull them out of the wall to do that. I think that's a little much. I think if you just describe maybe the brand, kind of model number, maybe you can put that in there if you want. But generally, this kind of description is fine. If there's an above ground hot tub or any kind of equipment you want to include there, definitely add that here. If there's other personal property not otherwise addressed, you can put that in here as well. So if there could be like, oh gosh, I don't know, maybe a fountain in the backyard or something else that is movable, but you guys want it because or your client wants it because it's just really neat and it goes with the property, you could add that in here. So that would be what goes there. Any questions at all on that whole first section?
Nope.
All right, we'll go into financing here. I'm going to assume you guys all are aware of all the boilerplate stuff, so I'm just going to kind of skip through that. If you're not familiar with it, I would really recommend reading the contract. This is an updated contract from a couple months ago. There's some minor changes to it, but it's always good to be familiar with the contract. But, obviously, if your client's going to ask you questions, it's good to know the answers to them. So I would definitely recommend reading the contract at least, once a year to make sure you are aware of any updates. In fact, the association puts, the Arizona Association puts red line versions out. So they will publish contracts that show the red lines of what's been changed over the previous contract. So that's really helpful to have. And you get that at their website. So as far as type of financing, if there's financing, if it's not a cash deal, you'll want to check conventional, FHA, VA, or whatever's appropriate. This section here, seller concessions, can get people in a lot of trouble, especially listing agents. It's a very small section, and people could stick in a number here like 8%, and you're reading over the offer and you just don't notice it. And that's a huge amount of money for a seller to be giving to a buyer. So you just always want to, when you're looking at an offer, always make sure you're checking out this section as the listing agent. As far as the buyer's agent, you want to use this if your if your buyer needs to have a certain amount of money down, but they don't have the money. So for instance, if your buyer needs to put 10,000 down, but they only have 5,000 put down, they might ask for $5,000 in seller concessions so they can make the down payment. Or they might ask for concessions for other things. It's kind of up to the buyer and the buyer's lender to kind of determine what's required in that section. So definitely confirm with the buyer and the buyer's lender to kind of figure that out. But sometimes you'll see, people put in like 3% because they just don't have any down payment. So just make sure you're checking out that section as the listing agent and use it as you need it as a buyer's agent. Appraisal costs, almost always in our market, the buyer pays for it. It's the buyer's appraisal, basically. And if it doesn't appraise, the seller doesn't want to pay for it. So what can happen is the seller can pay for it up front and then it can be reimbursed later. That's what this section's for. But generally, you'll see in probably 99% of deals, the buyer is just paying for their own appraisal. And that makes sense. It is theirs. So just like they pay for their own inspection. Title escrow company. You'll have an affiliation with Magnus Title, so we like to use them. But if there's a deal or someone else you need to use because it's a different part of the state or whoever you'd like to use, you can put here. So generally you put the name of the company and the escrow officer's name. And then you put their address, city, state, etc., contact information. Pretty basic. Prorations and any assessments and fees can go here. Most people choose to have everything prorated as the close of escrow. It just makes sense. The buyer owns the house on the day of the closing, so they'll pay all the taxes and HOA dues, etc., up until or through the close of escrow date. If there's any reason to change that, you could do that other and type it in here. But generally, everybody leaves this empty and just uses the proration as the close of escrow. As far as disclosures, this is the lead-based paint section here. If the house is constructed prior to 1978, you'll want the buyer's initials on this line. If it's after or in 1978 or later, you'll want the buyer's initial here, not on both. And you need to be careful here because Transaction Desk and some of the other software automatically fill all 4 of these in. So just be careful to remove the ones that you're not using so you don't tell the buyer that it's both lead and not lead. As far as this up here, this is whether or not the information was provided prior to the contract. Very rarely is this one checked because very rarely do people still live in houses, from 1978 where they know that they used lead-based paint. So it's pretty rare to have this one checked. The only time you see this check nowadays is if the listing agent told the buyer's agent they have no idea. So they would say, okay, that's information, but it's really not information about lead-based paint. It's just information that they have no idea. So, so this is the box that's typically checked. The seller shall provide lead-based paint information within 5 days. Buyer may within 10 days or whatever receipt conduct and obtain a risk assessment. So it gives the opportunity for the buyer to do that. This one doesn't prevent the buyer from doing inspections. It's just, this is a more appropriate box, and it's typically the one used. So any questions at all? Okay, this is a rarely used section here, is buyer warranties. I like to use this section, and when I don't use this section, I put none. But sometimes you'll have things that the buyer's agent will, or the seller's agent or seller themselves will say, like HOA cuts trees quarterly, something to that effect. And you can't find any documentation of that, and I cannot spell today, I'm sorry. Or anything else, or the roof will be replaced in such and such a time, or something will happen. So that's kind of a verbal representation of something that's happening in the property. Or even something to the effect of the roof was built or redone, 5 years ago. You can put that here as well. Because it's basically you're relying on a verbal representation without any actual, physical evidence. So that's what you can use that section for. Due diligence regarding the inspection period. Generally, it's 10 days. Again, in like in December, sometimes people will change that to 12 or 14 because you can't get inspectors, or people are traveling, or there are holidays that are taking away business days. So you just kind of put in here what's important. Generally, it's a good idea to talk to your inspector and figure out when they can do it, to make it sure they can do it within 10 days. But you could put anything in, you need to. Sometimes people put 14 because people are traveling or whatever. So do what's appropriate for your client. Sellers do often push back though if it's more than 10 days. And during the height of the crazy market for the last couple of years, people were reducing this to 1 to 2 days. That's kind of insane, but that's what was happening. So this is an important section that people often overlook: seller or on-site waste water treatment system. If it's on a sewer system, you want to check that. But if it's not, you want to make sure you check conventional or alternative system. I had an agent that didn't do this once. She checked the wrong box, and 6 months later, the buyer had sewage in their house because it was actually septic that overflowed. And that was a pretty expensive mistake on her part. So definitely make sure what kind of system your seller has, and make sure you check the appropriate box. These are buyer required sections. We just want to make sure that the buyers are definitely reading these sections, and hopefully they do. So swimming pool ones, obviously they're to save kids' lives. We want to make sure that there are appropriate barriers and functioning latches on gates, etc., to prevent drowning. This section here regarding buyer disapproval, very rarely do I see anyone change this. I don't see, I think I've seen it more than a couple times in all the years I've been doing this. People generally give, the full 5 days here, etc., and they generally give the amount here as well. So you can change them if you think it's advantageous for some reason to do so, but very rarely does anybody do so. Any questions? All right, home warranty plan. I recommend home warranties for buyers, at least for the first year. I know not everybody agrees with that, because they have differing experience levels with the home warranty companies. There's some better ones out there. I'm not going to list any at the moment, but there are some worse ones too. Kind of get a feel from different agents on what they think is good, and some are better with regard to HVAC, and some are better with regard to garage doors, openers, and hot water heaters, etc. So it's hard to know in advance what's going to go wrong. But generally, I've had pretty good luck in my own house. I had a furnace replaced when I bought a house for having a home warranty. So, for the first year, for 500, 600 bucks, whatever, I think it's a good idea to have one. It just kind of covers them for anything that might not have been known that could go wrong. So, but they don't have to. They can decline it. And if they do decline it, we have a form at Best Homes that kind of warns them that it's not a great idea and that they're taking responsibility. So either way, if they do choose one, you want to fill in the home warranty plan will be ordered by typically the buyer, or usually you guys, the buyer's agent, with optional coverage, which could be pool, hot tub, etc., to be issued by. Most people put TBD here because they don't know the company yet, because the client hasn't chosen. Or you can write out to be determined, as I typically do. and not to exceed the price. You definitely have to have the price in there if you're asking the seller to pay for it. Excuse me. It can't be open-ended for the seller because the seller's not going to agree to that. So make sure you put a number in here if you're going to have the buyer and seller, and they can split it. In a normal market, very often the seller will pay for it. The last couple of years, we've seen only buyers pay for it. I'm seeing more sellers in splits now. So just do what your client, wants you to do in that regard. This is often something that gets countered anyway. So whatever you put in here might be changed. So make sure you have your buyer initial it. Also, buyers and sellers need to initial each page and everywhere on the contract where it's warranted. So page 8, this is where you can add additional clauses, and I'll show you how to do that right here if you're looking up at the left-hand corner. So if you click on the first line, you could add clauses. So we have office clauses, personal clauses, and system clauses. I'm just going to click on all of these really quick so I can show them all to you. Pick a date, apparently. So it automatically fills in all this wording for you, so you don't have to come up with legal language if you don't want to. So the first one buyer agrees to purchase property in as-is condition and will not ask for repairs. Upon receiving the inspection report, buyer does retain the right to cancel during the inspection period. So we saw a lot of this the last couple of years where the sellers weren't going to make any repairs, so the buyer just came up right up front to make their offer better and say they weren't going to ask for any. And this one, buyer acknowledges that seller will not be providing a seller's property disclosure statement or insurance claim history as required by Arizona law. So every once in a while, you'll see a deal where the seller doesn't have one or didn't live in the house or just doesn't want to do it. So rather than having a buyer waive their legal rights as given by law to the disclosure, we simply have the buyer acknowledge that they're not going to get one. So they're not agreeing to waive their rights. They're just saying they're not going to get the disclosure. And then we have a form at Best Homes explaining why it is the Arizona law and what they are giving up by waiving or by acknowledging this. So let me know if you have any questions on that. And then the escalation clause, when buyer agrees to pay X for property in the event that the seller receives a bona fide arm's length offer that exceeds this offer, the buyer can increase their purchase price, etc. So that's what escalation clause. We'll cover that more deeply in a different time. And then we have this clause, buyer and seller agree to close on or before December 22nd on a date mutually agreed to in writing. This last part is important because a lot of people just do the on or before, but technically one party can force the other to close early even if they're not ready. So we want to make sure that we're choosing a mutually agreed to date. So basically creating another addendum. So if they're supposed to close on the 22nd, but they want to close today, they would be an addendum saying both parties agreed to close on December 20th. Any other terms and conditions you guys want to write in here, it's fine as well. Seller agrees to leave fountain in the backyard or swing set or any of those kind of conditions in here. You could put additional buyers or sellers listed in here. If you're representing a family member, you'd want to say, a buyer's agent is related to buyer. Any additional language that isn't covered in the contract that you need to either disclose or you want as part of the contract, this is where you put this in this section here.
Hey, David, got a quick question for you on that.
Sure.
All right. So on the where you go and where you're putting in that you're waiving, well, not waiving, here we go. Taking the property as is, will not ask for repairs upon receiving the inspection report, right? Now, I've actually been in this situation before, and I'm pretty sure, especially right now in this market, because there's going to be buyer's agents that are going to ask for, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 off the list price, right? And for the seller's like, hey, I'll give it to them, but don't ask me for doing any repairs, right? So if you already know that you're lowballing them to begin with, and you add this in the contract, say if something does come up in the inspection report, say like the AC, right? It shows that there is making some weird sound, and that needs to get looked at or whatever, looked at further, and say it needs to be repaired, right? Would we need to do, especially since this is in the contract, will we need to do an addendum to correct it? well, I mean, addendum to change the verbiage in the contract to ask the seller to make that repair or not?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways you can do that. One is you can separate out the HVAC. So in this first clause here, will not ask for repairs upon receiving the inspection report, with the exception of a non-functioning HVAC. So that's one way to do it. The other is just have a conversation with the other agent and say, look, we're going to cancel because we found out there's a $5,000 repair. We were thinking there was this little stuff. You know, I mean, we're not going to ask for the repair, but we have to cancel because we can't ask for the repair. Very often the listing agent will say, whoa, we don't want to lose the deal. So all right, let's talk about this. And you know, we go halfway with us. Will you just give us $5,000 for the repair? So it's all about the negotiation, right?
Okay.
So you can go that route too. What this does, this particular clause does, it takes the expectation out. So, you know, I've seen a lot of agents have a clause like this in there, and then they fill out a VINSR. Well, that's kind of double dealing, right? That's not being ethical, because you literally put in the contract that you wouldn't do that, right? So if it's if the roof is a concern, or the HVAC or something big like that is a concern, then you can put that in these sentences, except for the roof or except for the HVAC, or won't ask for repairs under $5,000 I've seen before, or whatever number people want to use. So you can change this around a little bit to cater to the particular house. And then if you find something that was not expected, it isn't covered by this sentence, then you can cancel. But I would just call the listing agent and say, look, we didn't know, and you didn't disclose that the HVAC system's not working right. So work with us here, or we're gonna have to cancel. So generally, if the listing agent's any good, they're gonna work with you.
Gotcha. All righty, cool. Thank you, brother.
That makes sense?
Yep.
All right. This section, for some reason, this line is the least filled in line for some reason. Usually it's the sellers that somehow don't get to sign it, but we want to make sure everybody signs it. This is the release of brokers. This is actually what covers you guys. It's the indemnity clause, so we want to make sure this is always initialed by all parties. Terms of acceptance. My own personal preference is to give people at least a day. Generally, I like 2. But that's, again, a matter of personal preference. What I don't like to see, because it almost never works out, is something like respond by 10 a.m. Generally, it doesn't work because people can't get stuff done before 10 a.m. They're at work all day, or they're doing something else. So it almost inevitably creates an addendum to extend the terms of acceptance. So my personal preference is like 5 or 6 p.m. so people can get home from work, review it and have time to get it back to you. That avoids counteroffers, that avoids additional addenda. So again, that's up to you guys though. So do whatever you want in there. It's a hassle to create an addendum or counteroffer to extend the term of acceptance. So I try to avoid that if at all possible. This section is generally filled out for you in transaction desk. If you have 2 agents, you'll put both of them in here, your code, state license number, etc. So if you have all this stuff populated in transaction desk, it'll do it for you. So too with the seller section. If you put in the MLS number and populate transaction desk with the MLS number, it will pre-populate all this section for you. So that's really helpful. The old days we had to write all that in, it was a real pain. So as far as agency, if you're representing the buyer, you want to check buyer. If you're doing a dual agency, you want to call me first and then check both buyer and seller. And the reason I say call me first is because dual agency is really tricky and people lose their licenses over it. So I just want to walk through how to do it and make sure that we're covering you so you can retain your license. And the same thing down here, if you're representing the seller, check the seller. If both, check both. And then this, buyers obviously sign up here. And then the seller sign down here. And the seller, if you're the listing agent and they don't like the offer, they want to counter, you want to make sure you click this box here for counter offer. And then you can fill out a counter offer with whatever terms you want to change. And just make sure you put the response on the counter offer that you want to, give enough time to respond so they can get it back to you before the counter offer expires. Because a lot of times I have to reject counter offers because they expired. So, and sometimes both the offer and the counter offer are expired. prior to the sellers and buyers signing it. So I even had one a couple months ago that an offer that expired before the buyer signed it. That was really unusual, but for whatever reason, the buyer couldn't get it signed on time before the offer expired. So they had to do an addendum to fix all that. So again, I recommend giving people enough time to be able to, sign these things and get them back. So any questions at all?
Nope,
All right, Adam, did I get it done in time for you? I hope.
you got it, man. Have a great Christmas, both of you, Eric,
All right,
Kristen, and David.
thank you. Anyone else
Thanks,
have
you too,
anything to
brother.
add about anything while you're here? No? You guys like white Christmas lights or colored Christmas lights? Let's talk about the important stuff. All right, if no one's got any questions, you guys all know how to reach me anyway. But that was the contract basics. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We got it done in about 30 minutes, not bad. So reach out anytime. Fastest way to get a hold of me is always via Slack, and then text, and then email, and then a phone call. Simply because I can't talk to more people on the phone at once.
Hey, David,
Yeah,
David, can I add something real quick?
sure.
All right, so especially for the newer agents, one thing I would highly suggest, and really know your the inspection period part of the contract for your client, okay? Because that is huge. It's going to save them. It's going to save them their money. It's going to alleviate a lot of issues. And trust me, I know from experience. Me and David had a very difficult situation with a buyer last year, and thank God for David, we were able to get this get it done. But guys, I'm serious. Know that section of the contract that is going to be really, really huge. Is that the inspection part of the contract?
Absolutely. Good advice. All right, guys. Well, wish you and yours a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year if I don't talk to you.
Merry Christmas, guys.
All right, take care, everybody.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Thank you. See ya.